the Stanley Cup. All 30 teams in the NHL won it. Next year it'll be 31 teams, but right now we're down to 2. In the East we have the Pittsburgh Penguins taking on the Nashville Predators in the West. So, who's going to win? Well, in this year's Stanley Cup Final, we have a bit of a rarity. We have the champion taking on the challenger. Detroit made the final in 2008 and 2009, winning in 2008, and then losing in 2009, ironically, to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Back-to-back appearances in the Stanley Cup Final is really hard. Winning it is even harder, which I suppose is good news if you're cheering for the Predators because they have never been there before. I see this as a battle between two teams with players who want to write their own legacy. Because let's face it, when Sidney Crosby finally decides to hang up the skates, we're going to be talking about him as an all-timer. I mean, you already hear that now. You hear all these ridiculous time-traveling arguments. Well, if you drop Sidney Crosby into the 80s, well, of course he would score more. And rightly or wrongly, in all sports, nothing cements your legacy quite like championships. And when it comes to the Stanley Cup, Sidney Crosby has a chance to win his third. So does Evgeny Malkin, so do a few guys, but Sidney Crosby is the focal point, and always has been. And last year, Phil Kessel shut up a lot of critics by getting a ring. Imagine if he gets 2. Speaking of which, are you surprised it took this long to mention him? PK Subban. It's been less than a calendar year since Subban was traded away from Montreal in one of the biggest trades of the past couple decades, and maybe one of the biggest one-for-one trades ever. And there's been a lot said about this, and a lot said about Subban making the Stanley Cup Final in his first year with the Predators. Some of it's right, some of it's wrong. Let's just look at the truth. Just because Subban has a chance to win the Stanley Cup this year, if Subban wins the Stanley Cup this year, it does not necessarily mean Montreal made a mistake. However, it would be very funny for the story, the drama, the reaction that could come afterwards, and the celebration. I think a lot of people are cheering for the Predators just because of PK. But enough about the Gosh Gee Willikers. Wouldn't it just be so nice to see so-and-so win? Who's actually going to win? Well, who's favored anyway, because as we've learned in these playoffs and many before, it doesn't matter who's favored, like at all. Heading into these playoffs, it looked like the Capitals were just going to walk in and take the cup. And then what happened? Now, I don't have any numbers behind this, but the Pittsburgh Penguins and Nashville Predators seemed more banged up than teams in the Stanley Cup Final usually do. The Penguins are missing like half their lineup, which is just kind of how the Pittsburgh Penguins always seem to operate. They have not had Chris Letang for a single second of these playoffs, and they're not going to. Ryan Johansson is out with an injury that I didn't know existed. I had to Google it and severely regretted doing so. Despite all the injuries, this series has essentially been chalked up to it's Pittsburgh's offense versus Nashville's defense. Now, up the middle, Nashville would have been at a disadvantage with Ryan Johansson healthy. Pretty much anyone who takes on the Pittsburgh Penguins is going to be at a disadvantage down the middle. They got Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. Beyond that, it doesn't matter who the other two are. If your top line center is in the top 100 players of all time, and your second line center isn't in the top 100 but should be, you're in good shape. It's looking like Nashville is going with #1 center Colton Sissons right now. And oh, woe is them, he just scored a hat trick, by the way. Now, it sounds like the Predators are getting Mike Fisher back, so that's good news for them. But even though they're busted up, I really like the Predators on the wing. Philip Forsberg just has the ability to take over any shift, and Victor Arvidsson is such a weapon. This has really been a coming out party for him. I don't mean these playoffs, I mean this season. He scored over 30 goals. And in these playoffs, he has 2 goals and 8 assists for 10 points in 16 games. I would say Victor Arvidsson has more to give, and if he gives it, that's bad news for the Penguins. Not to mention other weapons, guys like James Neal, and the defense. Now, the Predators have been stingy all playoffs long. Supposedly, the pairing of PK Subban and Mattias Ekholm have allowed 6 goals all playoffs. Subban, Ekholm, Ryan Ellis, and Roman Josi have 39 combined points in these playoffs. It's not even fair that they're all on the same team. From what I've seen out of them in these playoffs, besides the fact that they're good at keeping the puck out of the net, the defense drives the offense. They blast pucks on net. Sometimes they go straight in, sometimes they deflect in, sometimes they're stopped and there's a rebound and it gets collected in front for a scoring chance. And while they're bombing it from the point, it's a nightmare in front of the net, especially for the defenders to deal with, which sucks if your D-core is depleted like Pittsburgh's. Justin Schultz had such a good Game 7 against the Ottawa Senators. He's been such an important part of the Pittsburgh Penguins defense all season long, but it's come out that he's been playing with broken ribs. He's made it this far, but if Nashville Nashville finds a way to soften him up, that just makes Pittsburgh's situation even more miserable. But the super good news for the Pittsburgh Penguins is Matt Murray's come back. And he looks like and plays like Matt Murray, which is also good. And I've seen some people give Pittsburgh the edge in net, and honestly, I can't say I disagree with them, and we'll get to that. But regardless of who's been in net for Pittsburgh in these playoffs, goaltending hasn't exactly been the problem. Fleury laid a couple eggs, but he stepped in as soon as the playoffs started and was a monster. I mentioned this in a previous video that you can watch on this channel, but Fleury essentially stole the series from the Capitals. So the fact that Matt Murray is back is great. The fact that he's playing great is great, but I don't think it's like the Penguins got that much stronger when he returned. Although sometimes to make it all the way through the playoffs, you need two starters. The Penguins certainly have that. Speaking of which, the adventure that is Pekka Rinne.
Daddy, what were goalies like 30 or 40 years ago?
Well, they all played like Pekka Rinne, except they were a foot shorter. Rinne is a fun goalie to watch. He's floppy, he's all over the place, and he has a flair for the dramatic. And he's pretty good at playing the puck, except for when he's not. He is big and mobile, and he often uses that to his advantage, but sometimes it's also a fault. And if you're a goalie and you're not on top of your game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, you're gonna get burned. That being said, it doesn't look like it's gonna be a problem because he has a .941 save percentage in these playoffs. But teams have gotten to him. If he can just keep this up through one more round, not only will Pekka Rinne be a Stanley Cup champion, he might win the Conn Smythe Trophy. And then there's the fans. The fans in Nashville are out of their minds. This is well documented. But I went to game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final last season when the Penguins took on the Sharks. It's not like they're just subdued in Pittsburgh. Sidney Crosby scores in overtime. Ah, yes, Sidney, very good. No, they're screaming frothing maniacs as well. That being said, Penguins fans are screaming frothing maniacs who just got to win the thing last year. I like the whole back-to-back angle. It's extremely hard to do. I like the whole legacy angle for Crosby, for Malkin, and others. But there's something special about watching a team and watching a fan base win for the first time. And not just the first time in a long time like we saw with the Blackhawks in what seems like an eternity ago. I'm talking the first time! It's hard not to cheer for that. I mean, unless you hate the Predators. Couple more things. People keep giving Nashville the advantage on defense, and I think that's absolutely true, but just remember, the Penguins just had to deal with the Sens. The 1-3-1, the trap, the playing against Erik Karlsson, learning how to chip it out of the zone, fly it up in the air, dump the puck in deep. The Penguins, I think, got some good practice against the Sens. And just one more thing, you might give the experience advantage to the Penguins because they've won it a couple times. Heck, they just won it last year. And my counter to that would be, yeah, well, the Chicago Blackhawks had a lot of experience on their team too, and look where that got them. Both teams deserve to be here for the opportunity to kick the crap out of each other. And I think we as hockey fans deserve the opportunity to watch. So let me know down below, who do you think is going to win? Who do you want to win? What are you going to do if PK Subban wins it all? And what do you think will be said if Crosby, Malkin, and company repeat? If the Penguins win, who does Sid pass the cup to first? If the Predators win, who does Mike Fisher pass the cup to first? We're going to have answers to all those questions in about 2 weeks or less. So that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you liked this video. Click subscribe if you really liked it. Tell all your friends. And let's enjoy the Stanley Cup Final. It's finally here.